Hi, welcome back to the Fantasy Profits. This is our Week 8 waiver wire video. Now, before I get into the video, I want to thank for all you guys out there that share, subscribe, them, and part of our community. Help us to continue to grow the community by sharing our videos, liking, comment. All that matters. What we're doing is all the resources that we are getting essentially, we're putting right back into production, trying to improve the product. And so help us to grow the community, help us to improve our product for you guys to serve you well. So you're looking at the video, maybe it's a bad production, maybe it's injuries, just building out your bench, or maybe you have buys, which this week teams on a buy are Atlanta, Dallas, the Chargers, and Tennessee. Now, if you followed our videos for a while, you know, but in case you haven't, I'm going to mention this. When we do our waiver wire video, we talk about a lot of different players, and not all of them are widely available. The reason why we don't do that is players that are 95% available typically are not players that you can trust. So what we'd rather do is find players that may be 30 to 40% available, give you a comprehensive list of players. Eventually you can find a guy that you can plug in there for a bye week or injuries or whatever that you can trust to be more productive. I've got to say this, okay? I know we'll talk about a guy that maybe is only 15 to 20% available, but it happens time and time again. You'd be surprised how many times an owner will get into a pinch, let's say on a bye week, and he's got a guy like Pat Mahomes, doesn't want to drop him, but he's got a quality bench. Maybe they don't have big bench sizes in that league, and so instead of dropping a Pat Mahomes, what he'll do is drop a quality running back or wide receiver. So never make assumptions. Always check the waiver wire. Final thing I'll say out there is you need to contextualize this information. Every league is different, scoring system is different, etc. So take this information and flex it into your league. Let's get into our quarterbacks we think you should consider.
All right, so I'll go first. I got a couple of quarterbacks I want to talk about, and then once I get through them, Rob will go. And the first guy I want to talk about is Andy Dalton. Now, the first thing I want to say is that he's only 20% available, so that's not extremely highly available. However, when you think about it, that's actually pretty good. If 1,000 people were to watch the video, 200 of you would be in leagues where he's available. And so I think it's absolutely worth talking about because of how good he's been. For starters, this week coming up, he plays Tampa Bay, who gives up the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. That right there is almost enough to say you should start him. On top of that, Kwan Alexander, one of their players, is now out, making their defense even worse. In 5 of the past 6 games, Tampa has given up at least 330 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, they've been just awful. And Andy Dalton's production has been up. It's not just an easy matchup. He's 4th most passing touchdowns in the NFL so far this season, something that I don't think a lot of people would have expected. And then on top of that, sometimes we look at those numbers and say, well, he's had an easy schedule or whatever it might be. That hasn't been the case with Andy Dalton. He's played Baltimore, he's played Carolina, he's played Atlanta. He's had a fairly tough schedule, not necessarily the toughest in the NFL, but I want to make note that it hasn't been due to an easy schedule. And so I think that he could really capitalize off of this week and continue his momentum. Of course, he's been playing well, and that running back situation being such a mess helps him a little bit too. They're really relying on the passing game quite a bit. So I like Andy Dalton as my first quarterback. The next quarterback I want to talk about is Mitchell Trubisky. Now, he's 48% available, so again, he's a bit more available for you guys. You can make note of that. He's been extremely productive. Over the last 3 games, there's absolutely no arguing with his production. He has 12 total touchdowns, 11 passing and 1 rushing, and he's averaging 60 rushing yards a game these last 3 games. So I've actually been very surprised in how productive they've been. It's not just Mitchell Trubisky. That Bears offense is averaging 36 points a game over the same stretch. So kind of for whatever reason, something that we've been surprised about is just how effective that passing game has been. On top of that, again, not just next week being an easy week, the next 5 weeks are fairly easy. In fact, 4 of the next 5 games are easy. They play the Jets, the Bills, and the Lions twice. And so that bodes really well for them and Mitchell Trubisky's ability to kind of keep this momentum going. While I don't think he's going to continue to average 4 touchdowns a game and 60 rushing yards a game, yeah, I certainly think that he can keep up those numbers somewhat, especially with this schedule. So I like Mitchell Trubisky, who's essentially available in about half of all leagues. Rob, did you have something to say?
No, okay. Continue on.
All right, so then you were going to talk about Case Keenum, I believe, correct?
I don't have a lot to say about Case Keenum. I think Case Keenum has got a nice matchup this week. Now, he's playing Kansas City, give him the 4th most points to wide receiver. He's about 80% available out there. The Kansas City defense is starting to play better. I think that's a bit concerning there. And then if you look at last time they played Keenum, it was in Denver. They shut him down. Now they're going to be playing in Kansas City. So that's a little concerning for me. He's had 3 really good games where he was very quality fantasy quarterback. But then the other 4, he only had a total of 1 touchdown pass to 4 interceptions and averaged 25 passing yards. So I think he does have a good matchup. I think he's going to have to throw the ball a lot to keep up with that extremely potent Kansas City offense. But there is some inconsistency there. So he's a guy that you can play. But I do have a little bit of concerns. So what's your take on Case?
Yeah, I completely agree. That offensive line has been very effective. In fact, they're actually 4th best in pass blocking efficiency. He's got the weapons. Thomas, Sanders, heck, Sutton's come out and been good recently. Lindsey out of the backfield. But he's a bit of a gunslinger. He's averaging throwing the ball 36 times a game over the last couple of games through this season, which is actually skewed because last game they blew out Arizona and he only threw the ball 20 times. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, he threw the ball 51 times, so it's been surprising how much they're letting him throw the ball around. But you're right, against Kansas City is not a great matchup this week. But yeah, just to mention, he is an option. He is 80% available. Just wanted to put out a guy who is available like that. And then I wanted to do one more. I've heard a lot of talk recently about people who are in 2 quarterback leagues. For some reason, a lot of people are doing 2 quarterback leagues this year more than normal. And so I wanted to put a guy out there in case you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, in case you're in a 14, 16 team, 2 quarterback league. What about CJ Beathard, who is 91% available? Now, all of the guys we've talked about so far, I would prefer over CJ. But again, if you're really desperate, he is an option. Yeah, he played very bad last week, but don't let that scare you. He's still an okay option. He played the Rams defense, who's probably a top 5 defense in the NFL right now. They're playing unbelievable. And prior to that, over a 3-game span, he had 6 touchdowns. So 2 touchdowns a game is all right. He plays the Cardinals, who are an average defense, the Raiders, who are a little below average, the Giants, who are a bad defense, and then he plays the Bucs, who give up the most points to quarterbacks. So he's got a relatively manageable schedule coming up. If you're desperate, CJ Beathard is probably an option that you could go with. But again, I'm going to lean towards these other guys for sure before I would fall to him.
Yeah, we got a viewer out there that's in a 16-team league that starts 2 quarterbacks. That's 32 that they have to start. That gets pretty thin, and then he looks like a great option if you're in a league like that. So
yeah, absolutely. So who are your quarterbacks?
So the first guy I want to talk about, and I've talked about him a lot, is Jameis Winston. So he's 27% available, which is not wildly available, but that means for over 25% of you, he's out there. He plays the Bengals, who give the 6th most points to quarterbacks. Now, about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, we said this is a guy who's very talented. He's a good quarterback. He's not just a fantasy option. He's a good quarterback. And in fantasy football, I consider him an elite quarterback for a number of reasons. One, they have a terrible defense, worse than the NFL. They have to throw the ball a lot. And he's got great weapons on that team if you consider Godwin, Jackson, Evans, Brate, Howard there at tight end. So I think he's got quality weapons there. For me, in fantasy football, he's an elite quarterback. I would consider him just as good as Mahomes, Brady, and Rodgers. Mark my word, we said that he's going to be finishing in the top 10 weekly. Already he's shown the impact. In Week 7, he was the 3rd quarterback in fantasy scoring. In Week 6, he was the number 1 quarterback in fantasy scoring. Many weeks he's going to be top 10 or even top 5. So I'm not just saying you need to pick him up for a bye week. A lot of you out there are still starting Deshaun Watson, and you got Jameis Winston on the waiver wire. That's a guy that needs to be started in front of a player like Watson out there. So he's very good, a great play out there. You need to jump on that one. Another guy out there is Baker Mayfield. 59% available versus Pittsburgh, give the 5th most points to quarterbacks. Now, you look at Mayfield, he's getting more and more comfortable in the NFL, and he has most fantasy points last game. Now, some would say, well, it was against Tampa Bay and they're brutal, and this is true, but he's also playing Ben Roethlisberger, who's going to put points on the board. They're going to need to throw the ball a lot. I think he's a good option out there. So those are just a couple guys I think they should consider. So if you got anything to add, we'll move on to running backs.
No, I've got nothing to add. I completely agree with those. In fact, quarterback is so filled with options. There are still options. It's Week 8, and some of these other positions are less filled with options, such as running back and tight end. But let's just get into running backs, probably a little bit more a thin of position. So we're going to fill a lot of names and hopefully find someone that's available for you guys.
Yeah.
All right, so the first guy I want to talk about is Nick Chubb. Now, there's a lot of hype on Nick Chubb, and he is flying off waiver wires. In fact, I believe right now he is only 18% available. However, in those 18% of leagues, he should still be picked up. Throughout the season, before they let go of Hyde, he had 16 carries for 172 yards, 10.8 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. He looked pretty good. And then they let him go, or they let Carlos Hyde go. They traded him away. And last game, the first game without him, Chubb went off. He had 18 carries for 80 yards and 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 receiving. He looked very...
I think he only had 1 touchdown.
He only had 1 touchdown?
Yeah, 1 touchdown, yeah.
But anyways, he looked very effective, and sometimes the value in a running back just comes in his sole ability to be a starting running back. We're 8 weeks into the NFL season. Guys aren't just going to magically appear out of nowhere to be starting running backs who aren't in running back by committee systems. And Nick Chubb has kind of done that, and so he's got huge value. I think that he's a guy absolutely worth picking up who can help boost a lot of rosters into the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in the week, head coach came out and he said they needed to get him more carries. And then a couple days later, they trade away Carlos Hyde. I think that's indicative of the fact the team has a lot of confidence in this guy. They see a lot of potential, and limited carries he had before that game, he looked really good. This guy's got size. I think he can do it all. So if you're in a league out there where, like I said, about 20% available, you need to grab him.
Yeah, well, what I like is that throughout the season he had 16 carries, and then in the one game that he was the sole running back, his carries over doubled. He had 18 in that, and so that's huge. I like to see that volume that's coming. What about another guy is Austin Eckler, just to mention him briefly. He's 26% available. He's been productive this year, 6.4 yards per carry, 14.8 yards per reception. Of course, the Chargers are on a bye week this week, and Melvin Gordon is the starter, but Melvin Gordon has been banged up. You were just talking about this before we filmed the video. I believe it's a hamstring injury or whatever it is. That just seems to be plaguing running backs everywhere. We talk about, you were just saying Dalvin Cook. What were you saying about him and that he's supposed to be playing?
Yeah, week after week, he's good to go. Midweek, all of a sudden he re-aggravates that hamstring, and before you know it, he sits. And it seems like that's the trend in the NFL. These hamstring injuries are lingering. And then the one mistake that teams are doing is they're bringing them back prematurely and they're re-aggravating that injury. So I think that Melvin Gordon's going to be good to go come out of the bye, but you never know. And so.
Yeah. All right, so another running back that I like is Latavius Murray. Now, he's 28% available, so that's actually somewhat available. That's very highly available for how effective he's been. Over the last 2 games, he's combined for over 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. His production has been extremely high, and that's because of, like we just mentioned, Dalvin Cook hasn't been playing because of that hamstring injury, and honestly, looks like he will continue to not play. That just seems to be the way it is. I know that there's a lot of talk in the NFL this year that Vikings run game and offensive line is awful, but it doesn't matter. Quarterback Kirk Cousins, he's moving the ball. That passing game is moving the ball. When they get in the red zone, Latavius Murray only seems to need to get a yard or two to score a touchdown, and that's kind of the running back that he is. He's been very effective. And in fact, funny we talk about how ineffective that running game is. You were just telling me that his yards per carry have actually been pretty high recently. He said he had one game about 6.4 yards per carry, one at 4.6. And so the effectiveness is certainly there, and the fact that he's available in 28% of leagues just shocks me, that's for sure.
Yeah, find the red zone is nothing new for this guy. Find Pater, as they say. You actually brought up a statistic. I guess I knew it, but maybe I had forgotten. That was the last 2 years he had over 20 touchdowns. I think he was near the top in the NFL, right?
Yeah, in the 2 previous seasons combined, he had combined for 22 touchdowns, second only to Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, that's pretty solid numbers there.
Yeah, so Latavius Murray is a great option, but what about a running back who's more available in Marlon Mack? Marlon Mack is 46% available, and I actually like him. We talk about, again, looking for running backs who are starters. He seems to be the Indianapolis Colts. Like, he is the guy. He's a second-year player who's really developing from last year. I like his build at 6'2", 210. That's always something to remember with running backs. But he's been effective this year, 249 yards rushing on about 6.6 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, even scored a 2-point conversion the other day. And so, yeah, I like him very well. With Andrew Luck's play, that whole offense seems to be very dependent on him. But as Andrew Luck continues to play as good as he has, that really opens up the running game for Mack. And Mack seems to be using it to good effect with such a high yards per carry.
Yeah.
Another one we got to mention briefly, another 2 people I guess we should mention is Raheem Mostert, 88% available. He's the San Francisco 49ers running back. So far this year, he's got about 18 carries for 89 yards and 5.4 yards per carry. He's been impressive. The 49ers clearly like him. He might be worth a pickup just because of Breida being undersized, struggling with the injury. You know, I think that Raheem Mostert, he's going to continue to get some opportunities and possibly show himself. It is a bit of a gamble. Mostert, he's not the starter, right? He hasn't been unbelievably impressive, hasn't scored all sorts of touchdowns or wowed or impressed anybody to that extent. But just as a guy with such a high upside that could eventually turn into the guy who could eventually be extremely productive, I think he's absolutely worth a roster spot for a few weeks just to kind of see how he develops going forward. And that's some of the times, right? Some of the times we talk about these guys, they're not very impressive. And you just got to throw them on your bench sometimes just to see what happens, right? You got to be aggressive. We're in leagues where guys are on it real quick, you know. Odell Beckham before people even know who he was, or think about Alvin Kamara. You know, Alvin Kamara in a lot of leagues last year wasn't even drafted. In a lot of leagues that we're in, he was drafted because we're in such competitive leagues that these talents are just getting picked up so early. And sometimes you got to hop on these names quick just to be aggressive and to make sure you have an opportunity to have them. And then the last guy is Kenjon Barner. Now he's 99% available, and that's simply because he hasn't really played much this season. He is the New England Patriots running back. In fact, he's only really there because of all the injuries, right? Mike Gillislee at the beginning of the season was there. They let him go because he wasn't productive. Jeremy Hill was there, but then he was hurt for a season. And now Sony Michel is kind of banged up and having some health issues, and so Kenjon Barner looks like he might be an okay plug-and-play if Michel does not play, which is looking like that's going to be the case. Although we have to remember that James White is still there, and he has been wildly productive in the passing game. I think he had like a 4-game stretch where he had a 1 receiving touchdown 4 games in a row. So Barner's an okay option if you're desperate. If I'm being honest, I'm not a huge fan necessarily. What do you think?
Yeah, Sony Michel sounds like there's no structural damage on his knee. Sounds like if he misses, it's only going to be a week or 2. He's going to get a decent amount of carries there, but you're right. I think that they have so many other weapons there that he's not a guy that I would like to rely on. But for some of the owners out there that are very desperate in bye weeks in your deep leagues, maybe he's worth an RB2 or flex play, although I'd probably try to find something else where that's more trustworthy.
Yeah, exactly. So who do you have for some running backs to mention?
Yeah, you have some valid points. I go back to Odell Beckham, his rookie year there. He was injured in the preseason, didn't get a lot of play, and so a lot of people didn't draft him. Of course, we know he exploded once he started playing there, and I think it's important to be aggressive on the waiver wire because in our leagues, like you mentioned, that he's going to get snatched up there, so you almost have to be a prognosticator. You have to be almost a week ahead of the other owners out there. And I think Marlon Mack is a great example of that if there's a running back out there that's given an opportunity to become the starting back, even if he's not promising, he's got to be stashed on your bench. It is so hard to find starting running backs in fantasy, so you got to be one to stash these guys. I still know owners out there that have a backup quarterback or a backup tight end. Wouldn't you rather stash a Marlon Mack, who boom now is exploding, suddenly you look like you have a great option out there? These are the guys you have to put on your bench. This is how you build out a good team. So then you look at Raheem Mostert. You talked about him. A lot of people, it looks like Bride is probably going to be out. He re-aggravated that ankle injury again. And we were ones like others out there that maybe Alfred Morris would get those carries. But I think Raheem is just a better fit in Shanahan's offense. So if Bride misses time, and it sounds like he's going to maybe miss this week, I think that he's going to be a good play.
Yeah.
Another guy I want to talk about there is Jalen Richard, running back for Oakland, 75% available. We actually talked about him a few weeks ago before Marshawn Lynch went on the IR. We said this is a guy that's got PPR value in leagues that are 12-team or larger as a running back 3 or a flex play. This guy's on pace for 83 catches in an offense that needs to throw the ball a lot, and now Marshawn Lynch is out there, so I like him. Another guy out there that we're looking at is Rashid Penny. So Rashid Penny is 83% available out there. Now, he's a guy that I wouldn't trust starting right now, but you got to remember, one, this guy was drafted in the first round ahead of Sony Michel, a very talented back. His yards per carry are rising. He's had 2 solid performances recently. We had 9 carries, 49 yards. Followed up with 9 carries for 43 yards, and then added 2 catches for 27 yards. He's a better receiving back if you compare him to Davis and Carson. Once again, a former first-round pick that's very talented. He's got good size. Can't be trusted to start just yet, but he's one break away from becoming the starter, and all of a sudden there'll be a flurry of waiver wire competition for him. So he's a guy that I would stash now on your bench in case that happens. Ronald Jones out there, running back for Tampa Bay. Another guy like you talked about with New England there with Barner. Not real excited about him, but he's widely available. Like I said, 84% available. But Barber there, you look at Peyton Barber hasn't locked down that job. He hasn't been that impressive. Now he's questionable early in the week. We'll see if he plays. Now Jones came in the game late in the game when Barber was injured, and he did have a touchdown. And he's actually been used more effectively in the passing game than Barber. There's been a lot of criticism. Jones coming out of college that he doesn't have good hands, but they've worked really hard. He's actually improving as a pass-catching back there. So I think he's worth a stash, not a start. And then there's Aaron Jones, running back for Green Bay, 31% available out there. He's playing well. In fact, he's playing really well. What lowers his ceiling is the coach's unwillingness to get him more touches. And the reason why he's not getting more touches is they love Williams' pass blocking ability. But yet he's way too talented to ignore, available in 31% of leagues. And then there's Giovanni Bernard, 67% available. I won't get into details about this guy's pedigree and how talented he is and how you can trust him in there. Why am I bringing him up? Because Joe Mixon's back and he's looking healthy and he's running well. Here's why I bring him back. There's been talk out there. Of course, we're coming up on the trade deadline. There's been talk that he might get traded to another team. If he does, his value is going to shoot through the roof and people will run after the waiver wire like they did with Chubb last week. Doug Martin out there, 74% available. Now Lynch is out. Coach has come out and said that Doug Martin will get a majority of those carries. Although I will say this right now, Oakland just concerning for me. They're like a blue light special kind of mess right now. They're getting rid of guys left and right. They're rebuilding and looking at draft picks, clearly playing ahead to the future. He's not an exciting play, but going back to what we previously said, he could become the starting back there and get a majority of carries. Final one to watch is Dante Foreman. It looks like he's not quite ready to come back yet. Need to have him on your watch list, though. When he does, he'll be good. Do some quick hitters on guys that are not highly available, but guys that you need to look out there. Never assume that they're not out there. One is Kerryon Johnson, 14% available. This guy is legitimate running back one talent. He's a great keeper play, very good out there. There's Philip Lindsay, 14% available. Each week he gets better and better, and each week he's distanced himself from Freeman in that running back competition now. And Royce Freeman, ankle injuries day to day. Lamar Miller, 15% available. This is a guy that has struggled greatly, but last week he blew up, had 22 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And so he's a guy that's, I think, a good volume play. There's Isaiah Crowell, 17% available. Paul might miss time with an injury. This guy runs hot or cold. Now, he struggled last week, but it's against Minnesota's defense that's playing well. Unfortunately, he plays the Bears, and that's not much better of a matchup. And then the final guy I want to mention is Dion Lewis. He only has value in PPR leagues. That is it. He's 27% available, but we saw how useful he can be in the passing game. He's on pace for 66 catches. Last 4 weeks, he's had 20 catches. That would actually give him a pace of 80 catches for the year. So this guy is somebody that you can definitely look at in PPR leagues. That's kind of some guys I think you should consider out there. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I completely agree. I like that. That's, again, comes down to, like, paying attention. If Isaiah Crowell is out there, he's worth it, right? And just being aggressive and making sure to check that. And honestly, sometimes waiver wire is just about being the guy who checks it the most, or being the guy who's paying the most attention. And so, yeah, I like that. Just to remember, like, sometimes we forget to, like, pay attention for those names. They end up out there. Like, you don't believe it, but sometimes, like last year, Jacksonville Jaguars defense, they came off a 28-point week where they scored 28 points as a defense, and then they got dropped by a team in our league. And it was like, all right, but you got to be paying attention for that, and then you can capitalize. So, yeah, absolutely. And that's about it for the running backs. Now let's go to the wideouts.
All right.
All right, so first off, how could we talk about waiver wire? How could we talk about wide receivers in this whole situation without mentioning Amari Cooper and the mess that is the Oakland Raiders? I don't know if you completely trust the John Gruden process, but they are all in on the Philadelphia 76ers trust the process system there. In fact, they have 3 first-round picks in 2019. They are dropping talent left and right. It's crazy. It surprises me. So Amari Cooper gets traded to the Dallas Cowboys. This isn't huge news because he's only 15% available, and so again, that falls under that category of check it to make sure. You would hate to miss out, but he probably won't be out there for you. I think this does give him added value. The Cowboys are playing for a playoff spot. They are playing to win the division there somehow, and so that is just to boost that passing game, which has been horrendous. I think absolutely needs. Where this adds more value is to Jordy Nelson and Martavis Bryant. Jordy Nelson is 35% available. And he moves up to that number 1 wide receiver spot. He's had 3 touchdowns this year, and I like him. However, he is a little bit older. He's lost a little bit of his speed and his step, and he's going to be facing number 1 corner. So I don't know how much his production is going to be able to increase when you think about that talent level that he's going to be facing is a little bit better. I think this is a huge boost, however, to Martavis Bryant. Martavis Bryant is 96% available, so he should be out there for you. And he moves up to that number 2 wide receiver spot, and I think he's going to capitalize. He has been productive. He's got 15.7 yards per catch and 7.6 yards after the catch this year. He is physically talented. He is capable of performing, not just this year, but throughout his whole career. In fact, through 3 years in Pittsburgh, he had 17 touchdowns in those 3 years, despite being on the bench, despite being suspended and missing games and being the 3rd string wideout or being the 2nd string, whatever it might be. The question with him has never been with his athleticism, with his ability to produce. It's always been off-field issues or attitude issues, or he struggles to understand the playbook or whatever it might be. He is absolutely worth a shot. He could take off in a team that has a banged-up running game, right? Marshawn Lynch just went out. A fairly good quarterback. I do like Derek Carr. I don't think he's a horrible quarterback. I don't think he's great, but... And then, of course, a bad defense. He could absolutely benefit from just the kind of falling apart of the Raiders this year. What do you think about that?
I totally agree with your assessment there.
Yeah. So another guy to mention is Danny Amendola. This is another team that's just desperate for a wide receiver to step out. Amendola is 90% available, receiving, just in case you didn't know, for the Dolphins. And they are absolutely desperate. Devontae Parker is out. This week, Kenny Stills is out. And even when he has played, he's been a major disappointment. Albert Wilson is out. They absolutely need Danny Amendola to step up. And you know what? He did that last week and in the week before. So in the last 2 games, he's combined for 18 receptions. That's about 9 a game. That's very solid, actually. And then you look at the fact that he found the end zone on a very nice play. I like him. I think that he's a bit more of a PPR play because I don't think he's an amazing wide receiver, but the targets are going his way, and I think he has some added value that way. At 90% available, he's definitely a guy to look out for if you need a wide receiver. And then the last two guys I want to talk about, of all the receivers that we've talked about, these are the guys I like the most. And one is Tajay Sharp. Now, the big thing that's held Tajay Sharp back this year, because he hasn't had a fantastic statistical year so far, is just a simple lack of volume for the Titans passing the ball. They just haven't thrown the ball enough. And even the coaches came out and said that they need to get the ball moving in the air a bit more, and they need to spread defenses out a little bit. And you know what? The week after they said that, Sharp got 9 targets for 8 catches and 101 yards. The talent has been there. I remember 2 years ago, he was this sleeper that everyone was excited about. We were drafting him, keeping him on our roster, and he never really turned out. But that was kind of probably a product of the system. And when they finally said, hey, we need to throw the ball more, look at what he did. He had 9 targets, 8 catches, 101 yards. The production is there. And then on top of that, let's remember that he's had a tough schedule. He is being freed from about 4 weeks or 4 games that have been very difficult. He played Philadelphia, Jacksonville, Buffalo, and Baltimore. Those are very tough games. Now, Buffalo, not a very good defense, but that offense is so bad that why would the Titans feel the need to throw the ball out? Why would they need to score a lot of points? And so that's one thing to remember. And then the other 3 teams are probably 3 teams that are all in top 5 defense in the NFL. Jacksonville, Philadelphia, maybe not anymore just because they've been banged up recently. And then Baltimore, maybe the best defense in the NFL. So going forward, his schedule should be easier, and he finally is producing. And then the other guy is Tyrell Williams. Tyrell Williams is 85% available, and you got to get him now while you can. The last 2 games, he's combined for 8 targets, 7 catches, 236 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So he's not getting the ball thrown his way a lot, but he's productive when he does it. He's very T.Y. Hilton, Tyreek Hill. He's a big home run, deep ball guy. That's what he does. But don't mistake him for an unreliable receiver. He is reliable. In fact, he has only missed 1 target in the last 3 games. He has caught every ball but 1 that's been thrown his way. So he's been very productive. And again, I don't like guys who don't get a lot of targets. I don't like guys who don't get a lot of receptions, but that's just kind of who he is, and he's produced with those. Almost half of his catches, he found them in the end zone, so I like that. And then on top of you do have to remember they do have a bye this week, but on top of that, Phillip Rivers is a great quarterback who's been producing, and Melvin Gordon's a little bit banged up. And of course, they were supposed to have Hunter Henry this year, but he's not playing, and Gates is old and isn't quite producing like he used to. So I really like Williams.
Yeah, you talk about a few things. I don't think this is a fluke for Williams. A couple years ago, he had over 1,000 yards receiving. He's big at 6'4". I don't think what we're seeing now is a fluke. I would like to see his volume, his targets go up. I think he's very solid. I agree with you. The one thing about the Bills, I think their Bills pass defense is a little bit underrated.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a tough match. I mean, going back to Danny Amendola, yeah, you're right. I think I agree that I probably won't trust him in standard leagues, but in PPRs he's great, like you mentioned. 18 targets in 2 games. Now he had 14 catches in 2 games, which is solid. His yardage is a little low. He's only averaging about 71 yards between those 2 games. But if you're in a PPR league, those catches and those points add up quick. So I agree. Who else do you got there?
For wideouts, that's all. I know you've got a few you might want to mention. I've got a few names I can briefly mention, but I assume you've got a few guys.
Yeah, a few guys out there. Another guy to talk about is Cortland Sutton, wide receiver at Denver, 95% available. So why do you need to look at this guy? Well, one, he's talented. Obviously, I think in the limited time he's had, he's looked good, but there's been a lot of talk this week that Demaryius Thomas is going to get traded. He's on the trading block. If he does, Sutton would be the next in line to benefit from that. That would probably double his targets and production. He's a 2nd-round pick, 6'4", very big and physical, like Williams that he had mentioned there. He's had TDs the last 2 or 3 games, so I really like him out there. Another one was Traquan Smith. So Traquan Smith, Ted Ginn went on the IR. Now that he's on the IR, who's going to be that number 2 guy in that offense there? Well, it turns out it's Traquan Smith. He's actually lined up in 2 receiver sets opposite of Thomas there, ahead of Meredith. Cameron Meredith, who I like Cameron Meredith there. This guy's full of talent. In the offseason, in the preseason, the coach talked about just how talented he was, and he actually tore it up in the preseason. What slowed him up, I think, is his development. He struggled to learn the playbook, but now he's learned the playbook. They're increasing his time on the field. I think he's huge there. Another guy to keep an eye on is Michael Gallup, wide receiver of Dallas, 94% available. They're on a bye this week. Last game he played 56 out of 66 snaps. That's 85% of the snaps he played for Dallas there. Week 7 against Washington, he had 3 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Looked good in the preseason. Now, Dallas just traded for Amari Cooper, and that could go either way. That could hurt him because it could take away targets,
or could actually increase his productiveness as he'll now see less competitive corners. He's not somebody that I would trust, but he's definitely somebody you need to watch. Sterling Shepard out there, 25% available. This guy's a very good underrated number 2 wide receiver who's on pace for 1,161 yards. He was just a catch away from beating me last night's game. This guy is very underrated, and the Giants have to play from behind almost always. In fact, there's talk that the Giants might trade away. They trade away Apple today, their cornerback. Talk they might trade away another cornerback. So I think they have to throw the ball a lot. And another thing that bodes really well for him is Odell Beckham usually sees double teams in the best court. He gets a lot of attention there. Another guy out there is Chris Godwin, 51% available versus Cincinnati, giving up the 10th most points to wide receivers. Godwin last game played 69% of the snaps out there. He actually outsnapped the other wide receivers. If Deshaun Jackson wasn't having such a good year right now, I would trust that he'd become a weekly wide receiver 2 play. He's very talented. He's looked good. The one downside of it is they have so many weapons there. That kind of hurts his production. You got Robbie Anderson out there, also 53% available, versus the Bears, who give up the 6th most points to wide receivers. Last game he had 10 targets with Quincy Nuno out, and he might be out one more week if that happens. That's a huge value. If Quincy comes back, then of course that downgrades his value. We'll have to watch the injury report there. Guys that are not highly available, but once again, like I always say, never assume anything. And we talked about Amari Cooper. You said he's about 15 to 16%. Doug Baldwin is 16% available out there. Looks like he's getting healthier. The last game he had 6 catches, 91 yards. He's Wilson's best and favorite target in that offense there if he's healthy. Another one is Michael Crabtree. Now listen to this real quickly. Even if he's not available, you may want to trade for this guy if you have to start 3 wide receivers and you're in a deeper league. And here's why. For the next 5 weeks, he has great matchups, and I actually traded for him in a league because of this. He faces Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Atlanta, Tampa Bay, and Kansas City. All defenses that give up a lot of points there, who are vulnerable to the pass. I love his matchup. And then the other guy out there who's 20% available is John Brown on that same team. Got the same week schedule that he's got coming up, so it's a very solid play for him. But he's actually the best wide receiver on the Ravens team right now. He's had some very good games. He had 4 touchdowns on the year. He's got 2 times over 100 yards, so I think that's solid. And the final guy out there is Tyler Lockett, 21% available. He's had 5 touchdowns in 6 games. So
wow.
So that's a lot of information there.
That's a lot of names. If none of these guys are in free agency in your league, we don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
That's quite a few guys.
We don't want this video to get too long, so I rattle off a lot of information. You know what? If you miss it, pause, come back, go to it, but I don't want to drag this on, so that's why I throw that out there pretty quickly. So
yeah, and there's no substitute for personalized information, so just feel free to leave a comment and ask a question. We love it.
Love the comments. So
let's get to the tight ends then. All right, so the first thing I want to say is there's not a lot of tight ends out there. The options aren't great. It's kind of an ugly situation. We're gonna offer some names, but there's a reason that all preseason long I was saying you should draft Kelsey in the 3rd round, or you should get Zach Ertz in the 3rd round, or Evan Ingram, like pushing drafting a tight end early, because now a lot of people are saying, I don't have a tight end, there's no talent out there, and it's like, there's really not much we can do, but we'll try to find some guys. One guy, Austin Hooper, he is currently 19% available, and while he does have a bye week this week, after that, I like him a lot. He's been very underused all season. I don't know what reason or why, but they finally started to use him. In the last 2 games, he combined for 22 targets, 18 receptions, 148 yards, and a touchdown. For whatever reason, I guess Matt Ryan woke up and realized, hey, I've got a good tight end, I should probably use him. And so I really like that production the last 2 games, and going forward, he should continue to do that. Devonta Freeman being injured and Coleman's lack of production on the ground means that Atlanta's throwing the ball quite a bit this year. And so, yeah, I like Hooper a lot. He's only available in 19% of leagues, but if you're looking for a tight end, this is probably the most talented option that you might find out there. I noticed you're writing some notes down. Are they on Hooper?
Well, they actually are. You said he's only 19% available on a buy. I promise you this. After waiver wires go through, typically on a Tuesday night, I guarantee he's going to get dropped because it's a bye week. By the end of this week, I would expect he'll be about 35% available. So that number is actually going to go up. And you're right, that Atlanta defense, which was top 5 last year, has lost some key starters, and now they're near the bottom. They have to throw a lot. So
yeah, so I like that. And then the other guy that I like, everyone's kind of up and down on this guy, is Michael Roberts. So he's about 99% available. Are you really desperate for a tight end? Then okay, why not give Michael Roberts a shot? He's only played in 2 games this year. He only has stats recorded in 2 games this year, and yet he has still scored 3 receiving touchdowns. It's super weird. They don't seem to be playing him much. He's not getting the ball much, but when he does, he's scoring touchdowns. A lot of sites are saying that you can ignore him, and that's probably true, but he's absolutely worth keeping your eye on. At a position where, if you're in a 16-team league, you probably have no talent, Michael Roberts is a guy who is worth at least watching. I don't know what you think, Rob, but yeah, it's where it's tough because he hasn't played enough. He hasn't been productive enough. I can't trust him, so I don't want to throw him on my roster. But he scored 3 touchdowns in 2 games. You can't ignore the guy.
Yeah, you can't trust him, but you must watch him. It's funny you said that he's scoring touchdowns. It makes me think of Chris Carter for the Vikings there, that Buddy Ryan let go because he only scored touchdowns. So that didn't work so well for him.
Yeah, exactly. But are there any other tight ends? I know you have a couple of names you probably want to mention.
Yeah, O.J. Howard, 20% available out there, not widely available, but he's a very good tight end who's now healthy. He's back playing Cincinnati. He gives up the 3rd most points to tight ends. Jared Cook, 23% available, playing Indianapolis, who gives up the 7th most points to tight ends. Lynch is out. Cooper's gone. He's going to get some of those targets there. Benjamin Watson, a little bit more available. He's 60% available, playing Minnesota. That Minnesota defense is good, but they actually give up the 6th most points to tight ends. If there's an area where they're weaker, it's to tight ends. And then another guy that I wouldn't trust yet, I think that you need to watch him. That's Mike Gesicki for the Dolphins. 90% available. We're seeing his targets are starting to increase. He's seeing more time on the field. This guy was a combine stud. He's got all the skills out there available to be successful. So just don't pick him up to start, but definitely watch this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that you mentioned Benjamin Watson. You look at last game, they played the Baltimore Ravens, and for most of that game, the Baltimore Ravens shut down Michael Thomas. And you know what? I think that led to a little bit of extra targets Watson's way, and I think that he had an all right week as far as that goes. But then they go again in another week. They play Minnesota, who are another team, probably the only 2 teams in the NFL who I really would feel confident in them being able to slow down and stop Michael Thomas. And then, of course, on the top of the fact that you say, you're talking Minnesota gives up lots of points to tight ends, that could be a good week where Michael Thomas' production slows and Ted Ginn Jr.'s out and Alvin Kamara's production's been down a little bit. Maybe the ball goes to Watson a little bit more because of that. So that absolutely could be a good week. It was interesting, though, last week. Did you happen to watch the Saints-Ravens game at all?
I saw a good portion of it, yeah.
Did you see the first drive? The Saints went for it 4 times on 4th down and had a 3rd and 12 conversion, and they still didn't score. Man, I'm telling you, Baltimore, this is totally off track, but I think Baltimore is the best defense in the NFL right now.
Yeah, they're very good. They struggled early in the year. They're very strong. They were stronger last year. Going into last week, I think they were number 1 statistically in the NFL.
Yeah, both for yards and for points allowed. But anyways, that is totally off track. So yeah, I like Benjamin Watson, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let's move on, though. Unless you have something else to say, we can talk about defenses.
Yeah, let's go to our defense and kickers.
All right, so first I'll just mention a couple of defenses, and then Rob, you can go through. I don't have any kickers to mention. I know you have at least one, though, don't you?
Yeah, I'll do the kickers at the end. Let's get to defenses, and then I'll square it off at the end there. So.
All right, so the first one I like is Arizona. Arizona is 70% available, so they should be out there. And I don't know why they're out there so much. They've gotten 22 sacks already this year. They've got 22 sacks in just 7 games. They've had 13 turnovers and scored 2 touchdowns. On top of that, they play the 49ers. Jimmy Garoppolo is out. Of course, C.J. Beathard is not a great quarterback, if we're being honest. In fact, they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to defenses, so I like that matchup. They've been productive at getting after the quarterback, scoring touchdowns, turning the ball over, and you do it against not a great quarterback, not a great receiving core, banged up running back situation. Arizona could have a good week this week. Then we look at New England. New England is 50% available. So I kind of went Arizona. They're a good 1-week play, but I was like, what if you're looking for a long-term option for multiple weeks? I think New England could be them. They're 50% available, so you've got an okay shot of them being out there, and their schedule is easy coming up. They play Buffalo, Green Bay, Tennessee, and the Jets. All bad offenses. Of course, Green Bay is a good offense with Aaron Rodgers, but they also struggle with some pieces elsewhere. And the rest of that offense is pretty bad. They're averaging 2 turnovers a game, and of course, under the very disciplined coaching staff there under Bill Belichick, they really do a nice job. They scored a touchdown last week. They blocked a punt. They're looking very good as time goes on. They're every season, New England's defense seems to be like a fine wine. They get better with time. So I like that going forward. They could have a couple of good weeks here looking forward.
Yeah, I agree. They play Buffalo again with the most points of defense. That's a great matchup there. So let's look at a couple defenses. Indianapolis versus Oakland, 32% available last week. Indy had a huge game there. Made the mistake last second. I had Indy for that reason, but then I am switching to the Chargers versus Mariota, which I stuck with Indy. They had a huge week. They play Oakland, gives up the second most points to defenses. And of course, now Cooper's gone, Lynch is gone. That number could get worse. I like the Steelers versus the Browns, 60% available. Now, that defense for the Steelers give up a lot of points, but they're getting the pass rush going. They're putting pressure on the quarterback. They're getting sacks. Last year, they led the NFL in sacks, so they're a good option there. Washington versus the Giants, 82% available. That Washington defense is starting to play well there. And then Kansas City versus Denver, 84% available there. A couple things I like about that matchup. One, Kansas City's defense is starting to play better. Two, I love defenses in games where they're going to have to throw the ball a lot. It creates sacks, strip sack opportunities, interceptions. You know that Denver's going to have to throw the ball a lot to keep up with the Chiefs there. Now I'll just get a few quick kickers there. Jason Myers, Jets kicker. He's leading all kickers in points right now. Now the one thing I like, this guy's got a strong leg. I think he's in a great position to be successful. You have to watch weather with him. It's going to become a factor as winter comes in. Brett Mayer, the kicker for Dallas. Now they are on a bye, but they cut Dan Bailey, who was in fact, he's got the best kicking percentage in the NFL, number 2, I think, overall. And they cut him for this guy. Another one out there is Dan Bailey. 52% available. He's had double-digit points every week that he's kicked for the Vikings, and he's over 50% available there. Then Aldrick Rose is the kicker for the Giants, 82% available. This guy's got a strong leg. He's been accurate. He struggled a little bit his rookie year, but he's turned things around his second year. He was really highly touted coming in the NFL, so those are some kickers that you could consider if you're desperate. So.
Yeah, I like that. Again, I don't think a lot of people pay a very close attention to kickers, but those are all great options, and that's why those great options are out there. Season starts, people have drafted their kicker, and then they kind of just seem to ignore it, and so you can really capitalize on that and get some good options.
All right, so, well, if you have nothing else to add, you good there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Hey, thanks for joining us once again. Do us a favor, comment, like the video, share, help us to grow the community. God bless and take care.